Welcome to Pathways Through the Prairie. I am State Librarian Mary Soucie, and today I'm joined by State Superintendent, Interim State Superintendent.
State Superintendent.
State
yes,
Superintendent Levi Bachmeier, who also is my boss, so this is super fun for me. Levi, welcome, and thanks for taking time to talk to us today.
Mary, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So Levi, the State Library's vision is providing pathways to knowledge and opportunities. What was your pathway into public service?
My pathway into public service, I think, began, two things stand out. First, growing up, faith has always been a big, important part of my life, and every Thanksgiving, before we went to a family member's house to enjoy, the traditional Thanksgiving meal, it was really important to my mom that we served a meal at our church on Thanksgiving to anyone who wanted to come and enjoy some fellowship and some food. And so I think just the idea of service has been something, and we didn't really talk about it. My mom didn't make a big deal out of it, but it sort of was the air that you would breathe. And whether it was through church or through Boy Scouts or through sports, I mean, just this idea of service and community, and so many of these things I think are just sort of built into the DNA of North Dakotans. So I don't know that my story is really all that unique, from so many, but that was one thing that came to mind. The other was during my first semester of college, graduated in West Fargo, went to the University of Minnesota, was, sort of valedictorian, honor roll kid. And so it was like, I have to be an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer, and didn't really spend a whole lot of time in high school really reflecting on, what was my vocation. Sure. And so I spent a lot of time really reflecting on that during my first semester, and, sort of came to the determination that, I need to pick a career path that is personally fulfilling for me, not just limited based on what my high school GPA was. Which I think is something that we're doing a better job of now than we were 15, 20 years ago, which I think is great. And sort of going through that process, I had some great mentors, took some great classes. One of the best classes I ever took was on personal leadership, which asked some of these pretty foundational questions about impact. And I think came to the determination that public service and education in particularly is a deep value of mine. And so I changed majors from biochemistry and all of those incredible and important science, disciplines towards education and the humanities, and went in and then graduated. Interestingly enough, the University of Minnesota, great university, one of the largest in the country, did not have a high school social studies education degree.
Intriguing.
That did not involve getting a master's immediately. And so I transferred to my now alma mater of Concordia, joined the track team, which was, it continues to be a deep passion of my life, and then really just sort of set on the path of education, which has sort of meandered its way in and out of public service. But really, I think whether you're, doing state government work or any local government work for the right reasons, or education for the right reasons, it's about serving your community and making a positive impact that best supports future generations.
Absolutely. So let's talk about Boy Scouts for a minute. Are you an Eagle Scout?
No, that's my brother.
Okay.
I have to embarrassingly disclose, I don't think I made it, far past the Pinewood Derby races in third or fourth grade. I got a little too deep into sports. But no, whether it's my brother-in-law, Brett, or my younger brother, Cole, I've just one brother. The lessons that I see, the skills that I see my brother, put to work every day as a result of his Eagle Scout is pretty impressive, and I wasn't quite tough enough to hack it. So I don't know that I made it far past whenever you transition from Cub to Boy Scouts, but I didn't make it.
My son is an Eagle Scout.
Oh, great.
And my husband as well. And I have a nephew who's about to become an Eagle Scout. But my son did his Eagle Scout project actually at the library I used to be director at.
Oh, no kidding.
He converted our magazine room into a space for teenagers.
Sure.
And I was just home visiting, in March, and we went into the library. It was a celebration for the library of their 50th anniversary, and the room is still there, and the work he did is still there, and so it's super cool and now he lives in that community. Yeah. So he made an impact, on the community that's now his home community.
Yeah, I mean, my brother, he planted dozens of trees in this sort of open field that was next to our elementary school near our house, and so just to drive by now and see, the impact that it's just much more inviting and usable space as opposed to just being this big open field. I had a cousin who, redid some park properties in rural Cass County. I mean, so there was
cool.
Yeah. And I just think, whether it's those Eagle Scout projects or just true service and experiential learning opportunities for students, they're just so incredibly important. And whether, there was a recent article written by a, forum columnist that I took issue with that said, we need to get sports out of high schools. And I responded pretty, forcefully to that because, some of the greatest life lessons that I learned about, grit and resilience and community and all of these important things that we need young people to learn if they're going to, succeed and frankly thrive in a new sort of AI paradigm. These are all things that AI will never be able to replace. And so whether it's sports for some or an Eagle Scout project or the arts, just activities that are relevant and challenging and service oriented. I just think we need to get more of them embedded into the educational experience of young people. So it's just one of many really great experiences that I hope, all students find for themselves over the course of their educational career.
Just the team building alone that you learn through sports and the learning how to lose gracefully sometimes is so important.
Yeah, and in the arts, my wife and I were a great pair for a lot of reasons. We have a lot of similar, interests, but we're also very different. And I learned the same lessons on a football field, getting run over by 225-pound, football players that she did, being classically trained in ballet.
Sure.
And so it's for me, it's about what's the lesson, what's the learning, not necessarily, what does it have to look like? We don't need to force every student into theater. We don't need to force every student into football or even Boy Scouts, but how do we understand that students learn these same skills in different ways.
Right.
And I think that's wonderful. And how do we, better connect students with those experiences that really do enable them to feel a deep sense of connection with their community, to develop skills that they will rely on every day for the rest of their lives. And that's going to look different from, even, the two of us and everybody here in the Capitol. So I think it's so great and so important that we provide, a well-rounded experiential education for our young people.
I agree. So, Levi, you hit the ground running when you became state superintendent. And how many schools have you visited now in North Dakota? Have you lost count?
I've sort of lost count. I would say I'm saying right around 50. My goal was to get to 50. We had to reschedule a couple. We added a couple. So for all intents and purposes, I'm coming up right on about a third. We have not quite 170. But I just felt that it was really important as the new guy to get a sense of who I'm serving. One of our state legislators, Jim Jonas, was also my high school football coach, and he had a line even then that you have to listen, to learn, to lead. And if this job is, ultimately about leadership, you have to do both of those things first. You have to learn about what the needs and challenges and successes are of all of our school communities. And the only way that you do that is listening. So I think I'm somewhere north of 25,000, but not quite to 30,000 miles traveled since taking the job in Thanksgiving. And luckily for me, I grew up driving all over the country with my dad. So I'm used to windshield time, but it was just such a fabulous way to get to know people and to understand what's going on in Litchfield, Marion, and what are they really excited about? What are they really proud of? What challenges are they facing? And to be able to walk away and then at the next school visit in Divide County in Crosby, not only see a wonderful collaborative library space, but also say, oh hey, yeah, it sounds like you're sort of grappling with this challenge. Hey, why don't you give this administrator a call here? Because I think for so long in North Dakota we've relied on just the organic, grapevine, and that's really great. But I think as the world, continues to change, that is getting harder in some ways and easier in others. And so just to be able to see the differences and the similarities of our school districts, big and small. I think it was shocking for me, and I'd imagine for most people. Bismarck Public Schools, our largest school district, almost 14,000 pupils. Smallest school district in Marmarth in beautiful Slope County in the southwest corner of the state, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
4 students?
4 students. So, and there was 100% attendance the day I visited. So I got a picture with everybody, which was really fun. And so, but the challenges that Marmarth are facing, there's a lot of similarities with the challenges that Bismarck's facing. But at the same time, if you've been to one school district, you've been to one school district. And even Bismarck is navigating things that are different than Mandan. And so I think it's just so important for me. And just as a deep lover of North Dakota history and geography, what a wonderful privilege to be able to get out and visit all 53 counties. So it's been great. I am looking to getting a little bit more work done this summer because it was, it's a lot of driving and a lot of time behind the wheel. And I'm not a big entourage guy. So most of these was just me getting in the truck and driving out solo and walking around and asking questions. And, you know, I find that when you're just having a informal conversation and walking around, sometimes those are the richest insights that you learn. You know, this isn't an overly formal process. I told everybody I want to see you teaching because that's ultimately why we're here. I want to tour your facility and get an understanding of your learning environment. And I want to talk to community and school leaders, however you define that. So in some places they brought in local faith leaders. In others, they would bring in business leaders. There was almost always, you know, school board members and administrators. Many of them brought in teachers. About half of them brought in students, which I thought was really great.
That's cool.
And so just a wonderful opportunity to either, you know, walk around and ask questions or just sit down and really enjoy the puzzled look on people's faces when I said, I don't have an agenda here other than to listen. So here are some general questions. What are you most proud of? What are the biggest challenges that you are facing? And what should I, as the new guy, know in Bismarck to best serve you in X, Y, or Z school district. And then from there, the conversation just flowed and there were a lot of common themes, you know, budgetary challenges, the role of technology in education, the importance of, you know, career and technical education and getting kids hands-on experience, sort of back to our earlier sort of service and Boy Scouts conversation. So there were commonalities everywhere, but there was also, you know, really unique situations that each of our school districts are navigating, and you're not always going to see that if you just look at the reports that get filed, you know, with DPI. And so I feel like I can better serve, you know, those 50 some school districts now as a result of those visits, and I look forward to getting to the rest of them as soon as I'm able. That's
awesome. I grew up in a much larger state. I grew up in Illinois, and like I don't even know who the superintendent was, right? So that's one of the things I love about North Dakota. Like it's so small and connected, and we work together really well. I serve on the ND 250 commission. We actually had a commission meeting this morning, and we had a conversation about how in our state the tribal nations are working with the ND 250 commission. There's a lot of feelings around the ND 250 or America 250 celebration within the tribal communities.
Absolutely.
But here in North Dakota, like they're going out of their way to connect and be part of the story. And I think that's just kind of the North Dakota spirit. So I applaud you for all the windshield time. Did you have any, like, were there any surprises or any like aha moments that you had?
That's a good question. I mean, you know, visiting a school district of 4 students, I just didn't know what to expect. I started my career teaching on the Pine Ridge Tribal Nation, which is, you know, in South Dakota, you know, small district of less than 200 students. So even though I grew up and graduated from West Fargo, and that's the school district that I was working at before starting this job, you know, I want people to know I know what it's like to work in a small rural school, but it's you know, going from 200 to 12,000 is just sort of a matter of scale, but going from 200 to 4 is actually pretty interesting. So there a school? There's a school, and a recent addition of 2 classrooms, and it's a very nice facility right there in Marmarth. And so I think just enjoying the quirks, and every school district has them. I think was fun, but you know, one of the big takeaways, you know, for me is whether you have 4 or 14,000 students, we have more similarities than differences. We have important differences, but we have a lot of similarities that these themes kept coming up. And whether it's AI or device uses, technology was one of those big themes, hands-on learning experiences. I mean, our school leaders, whether working in a big or small district, I mean, they all want the same thing in that they want their kids to be prepared for the future. And that may be defined a little bit differently in Crosby than it is down in Fairmont. But there's more overlap than not. And so I think just trying to understand, okay, you know, I'm seeing a lot of convergence around these topics. So maybe that's an area where the department can add value, and you know, sort of fulfill our mission to both ensure accountability, which is part of our job, but also to be a capacity builder and a support for these, you know, school districts. So it's been, the similarities piece, I think, was sort of a surprise, and if there's any aha or, you know, I'd say gratifying, the people who work in our schools, and I don't just mean the teachers, but the PTA members that I met, the administrators, the crossing guards, you know, that are working at a, you know, pretty modest wage in the morning, like, people care really deeply about kids here. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And so, we have good teachers. And so I think what I've left with so far is a pretty deep belief that we have everything that we need in North Dakota to have the greatest school system in the country. It's just, how do we take it out of individual pockets and get it to every student across the state? So it's a question of scale, not a question of ability.
Okay.
Which I think is really encouraging, because it's a lot easier to figure out, okay, and just frankly, by our nature, we're a little hesitant of what's going on in California or on the East Coast. And I think there's some pretty good reasons for that. But to say, hey, you know, there was something interesting going on up in Langdon, you know, and if we can take some of the cool things that are going with career exploration there and expand it to 52 more counties, so it's everywhere, you know, and so I think it's really a question of how do we cultivate and how do we grow the great things that are happening in pockets. And I think if we can figure out how to do that, I mean, the good news is we already are a high performing state when you look at sort of national comparative test scores, but it's not, you know, I'm a track and field coach at heart, but it's not overly, you know, aspirational to say that we can give our kids the best education in the United States of America. And that's my goal as a guy, you know, who has two little girls who aren't yet in our public school system, but they will be. You know, I not only have an obligation to the students in our system right now, but the students who aren't yet there, including my two daughters, to make sure that they have the most incredible experience possible, so they're prepared to navigate, you know, a world that is going to be looking very different by the day when we think about the forces of technology and just all the change that we're experiencing in society today.
I was just talking to someone recently about my first cell phone, talking about changes. My very first cell phone literally was a car phone. It was the bag phone that only worked plugged into the, you know, the cigarette lighter, and that wasn't, relatively speaking, that long ago.
No.
You know, it was like 30 years ago. And now I carry a computer in my pocket.
Yeah, supercomputer, more power than what sent us to the moon.
Kids, or in my case, hopefully maybe someday grandkids or great nieces and nephews going to experience that I can't even like imagine. So you talk a lot about your family, Levi. How do you balance the challenges of the role you're in, you know, with your family life?
I think, you know, the big goal, I used to work in the governor's office for Governor Burgum, and I just learned so many incredible things from him as a mentor and an executive leader. But I was really bad at boundaries. And so work would very quickly, you know, creep from 70 to 80 to 90, and there were some 100-hour weeks in there. And I just, you know, I was in my 20s. I was dating my now wife, but we weren't yet married. I mean, it's just sort of a different, you know, point in life. And so now, you know, as a married man and dad of two, I have to make sure that I both, you know, fulfill my obligation to the 116,365 public school students that I have the privilege of serving, but that can't come at the expense of the two little girls that, you know, I'm raising in my own home. So it's just trying to be, you know, my old job, I was the finance director in West Fargo Public Schools, and, you know, half my time was just finding efficiencies. How do we get the most of every taxpayer dollar to maximize student income or student outcomes? And in many ways, I think it's the same, you know, premise. And frankly, an important message, I think, for all of us, you know, to practice, is, you know, let's measure, you know, our outputs, what we accomplish, not necessarily our inputs. And so for me, that has meant trying to be really intentional about, you know, not working on Sundays. And even if I am traveling, taking time to step out, and I've had to do it, and it's been awkward in some ways, but it ultimately comes down to what are your priorities, you know, whether it was a fundraiser that was being held for me or a campaign event. that if, the FaceTime call rings from my wife, I know it's to say goodnight to, to Rosie and Lyndon, and I'm going to do that. So I think it's just trying to be as intentional as I can and try to find as many efficiencies as possible. And I am a big believer that you have to lead by example. And so whether it's talking about the importance of reading to your children, or, we all need to do our parts as parents to prepare students to be successful when they enter kindergarten. I don't want to just say those things. I need to live them.
Sure.
And so that means that I got to do both of these jobs. And I was listening to a podcast actually just this morning, and Ben Sass, if you're not familiar with his story, former U.S. Senator, former president of the University of Florida, going through some really significant health challenges, and has been more or less been using his death sentence to reflect pretty deeply on the meaning of life. And so there's some really interesting podcasts that he's been putting out. And I was really struck by the comment that he made of parenthood being a vocation, and it is work. And I think that's pretty beautiful. So I think it's making sure that the main thing remains the main thing, and that for me that's my family, and then using every second that I have that I can when I am working to try to move the needle here to support all of our students.
I love that. And you've probably heard this because you have young kids, and all of us old people with older kids love to say this, but it's so true how fleeting time is that you have with them. My son's 32. He lives in a different state. We actually were just lucky to go on vacation with him and his beautiful wife in April. They joined us. My husband had a work trip, and they joined us in Florida for a couple days. But you have to take those moments where you get them, and especially when they're young, because those moments shift so quickly.
Yeah. All the cliches are true. They mail you the coffee mug that says the days are long, but the years are short.
Right.
Our eldest is not even 3 years old yet, and boy, is that true. I mean, I was just putting her to bed last night, and I lay her down in her bed, and she's like, "Will you hold my hand?" And just to sit there for 60 seconds laying on the ground next to my 3-year-old laying in her toddler bed it was a very powerful moment of just gratitude as a practice that I really try to focus on. I think that's also how I, try to manage a pretty busy schedule.
Sure.
And I think just being present and enjoying, these small moments. I think, too much in our society, everyone's chasing the next big thing, whether it's the promotion or the big trip or, what, and those things are all important, right? But I have really been trying to find value and meaning in those little moments, and really savoring them. So, last night was just one example of that, which has really helped fill my bucket. So when it is getting up, and hitting the road at 5:30 in the morning or coming back, long after dark, those are the things that are keeping me going.
I've heard you talk a lot, Levi, today, but also in just every conversation that we've had, gratitude is very important to you.
Yeah.
It was also to Governor Burgum, so I don't know if that's a takeaway from working with him, or if has it always been what has driven you?
I would say that working for Governor Burgum sort of cemented it as a core value, and we'll probably talk about book recommendations, but and my wife and I had a really interesting debate before Lyndon was born. Like I said, she's 2.5, about what we wanted, scared, excited, to be parents discussion. And Rachel was like, well, I just want her to be happy. And I was like, that doesn't feel like good enough, right? But I didn't really know enough about happiness. And so I really have been sort of studying it academically over the last couple years. And there's a science, there's tons of neuroscience, there's tons of fascinating, things about it. And one of the most important, components of that is gratitude. And so I would say it's a value, both of my upbringing, of my faith, and I think was just, instilled. I just have so much to be grateful for. I got a great education growing up. I, grew up in a wonderful family, and I think that was a sort of an unspoken value. And what I really appreciated about Governor Burgum, and it drove me crazy, honestly, having watched so many of his speeches, is I could tell you that every single presentation was always going to start with the same PowerPoint slide of the globe taken from some satellite that just had the word gratitude on it. Right. And it would be, whether we were talking about K-12 education policy or resolving the Dakota Access Pipeline protests, which was the first project that I was lucky enough to be assigned when I started, was gratitude. And I think it's, it's the most powerful force on earth. And I remember thinking, when Doug would talk about that this is just a ruse to make me work harder. But it's a core value of mine. And I think we just have so much to be grateful for. And I think that was one of my big takeaways from living frankly, on Pine Ridge, was if you are living in a community that's statistically the most impoverished in the entire, continental United States, and to witness, the gratitude and the generosity. I mean, if those are core values in a pretty tough place to live, sure. it shouldn't be that hard for all the blessings that has been, bestowed upon me, to make that a pretty central tenet of, of who I am and what I value and how I try to live my life.
Right. All gratitude also, that's a core value that I learned from my mom.
Sure.
And there's a group of 4 state librarians. This started 3 years ago, and it's Wednesday, so today was our gratitude text.
Sure.
And every Wednesday we text something we're grateful for from the week, and it might be work related. My gratitude today, as a Larks host mom, was baseball.
Sure.
Because the Larks season just started. One of my players actually, Governor Armstrong threw out the opening pitch yesterday at the game, and one of my players was the person that the governor selected to play catch with and to catch his ball at the plate. And watching his excitement about that, as well as he's like, if they hadn't told me who he was, I wouldn't have known, because he's just so down to earth.
100%.
And watching his joy, a college-age boy that was excited about that, and then, I'm so lucky that I get to have these young men live in my house, and so there's so many things, like you said, when we come from that place, even when things are tough, sometimes you have to work really hard, but if you can think of something to be grateful for, it can just turn that whole thing around.
Yeah, absolutely. That there's a lesson in every hardship. I think one of the great sort of false lessons that we've tried to impose upon young people in the last decade is, that what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. There's so many lessons to be learned through challenge, and the greatest satisfaction, back to the science of happiness, you can't achieve, satisfaction is one of the 3 main building blocks of happiness. You don't feel satisfaction without some level of struggle. Now, that doesn't mean that has to be existential. It doesn't mean that you have to suffer, but that working through, that there are opportunities to be grateful in almost everything. And to your point, it's easy to do if you commit to it. So whether it's your Wednesday, gratitude text, or the practice that I have really found a lot of meaning in is just every Sunday night to pick 5 things, just 5 things. And they range from the health of the girls to the fact that I got to go and spend some time at the state track meet last week, which is my favorite, weekend of the whole year. And you do that on Sunday, just 5 things. And then over the course of the week, you pick one of them and you reflect on that one thing for 1 minute. So if it takes you 5 minutes to come up with your list of 5 things, and then you spend 1 minute on each of those, I mean, it's 10 minutes out of your 168 hours in the week. And whether I'm walking the dog or, we have the time. If looking at my screen time report every week has taught me anything, we have the time to do the things that we want. Are we intentional about how we're using that time? And I think, gratitude's one of those cheat codes that just a little bit of time spent on it has such a huge return on investment in terms of just life satisfaction and meaning and just overall well-being.
Absolutely. I was at a training, this was probably, 5 years ago or so, at the Benjamin Franklin Institute, which, oh my gosh, those people are so incredibly smart. But since then, one of my big takeaways, I've turned off all the notifications on my computer. But my other one was, I no longer say I don't have the time. I might say that, but inside what I'm saying is, I choose not to have the time for this because I'm making that more important. And I think that can be another important lesson that we learn.
That is a profound level of wisdom that I think we need to be talking about more. I mean, these cell phones, and I'll be it's hard to say out loud, but, I have a low level addiction to my smartphone. And so, I have a couple shticks that I like to hit when I'm out talking to, particularly high school students. But one is you have to both treat your cell phone like it's a loaded weapon that can do both yourself and others a great deal of harm, and that it's like alcohol, that if enjoyed in moderation, it isn't inherently a bad thing. But if taken to a deep excess, it can ruin you.
Absolutely.
And so I think just we can't tell kids to to completely turn away from technology. That is a disservice to them and their future and participating in the global economy and all of that. But to your point, being as intentional about how it's being used and recognizing that how you use your time is a choice.
So we've talked about a lot of personal stuff. Let's just bring it back for a minute to your position as state superintendent. Yeah. What has been your biggest surprise since you've been serving in this role?
My biggest surprise, that's a great question. I think it depends sort of on the day. Sure. And as I continue to, learn about all the different facets of, the role and the work, is honestly, the department has a lot less power than I think most people think. We collect a lot of data. We enforce the law. And I really view it as how do we bring people together? So sort of, bully pulpit soft power as opposed to, here are a bunch of, sticks and carrots, which is frankly, a little bit more of my leadership style personally, as opposed to, cajoling and coercion. But, you think of state government and all of these things. And I think that goes back to the way that our state was founded and sort of the Germanic roots. Our governor's office has much less power than many other states. I mean, it's just sort of baked into our DNA. But coming from a school district, to the state level now, there's certain reports you have to file. Yeah, there are things, that we can do to maybe make some administrators' lives a little bit less fun if they don't get those things filed on time. But, really, the more conversations that I have and the more feedback that I have, with administrators it's how do we facilitate a culture of continuous improvement and a commitment to kids. And that's going to be something that you can never really put in a bill. So when I was in the governor's office or even, applying for this, this job, was thinking a lot about like, okay, what's the bills? What are the policies? And all of that has an incredibly important place. Don't get me wrong. But the other part of this is how do we create, a system, a process, a team, that is, all working towards the same goals. Cause I think, I was visiting, it was Lisbon, and I was visiting a CTE classroom. They gave me a crew neck sweatshirt, and it had an outline of the state, and it said "One state, one team," which I really just sort of adopted as sort of my mantra for how I'm trying to view the work here. And I think it's good. We're coming up on America, 250, and I'm a history and government teacher. That's my professional training. And anyone who studies the history of this country well knows that that a lot of these checks and balances, the push and pull between, national, federal power and state power, I mean, all of these things are really by design. And so I think, just thinking more deeply about how do we, both respect the local priorities and perspectives. That's why we have all of these school boards. Otherwise, it would just be the legislature. And I think that that's really important. And at the same time, how do we find those areas of commonality to work together to go to the next level. And I think you can, and just getting in here and getting, more steeped in the data, we're a high performing state. And maybe that's when one of the other surprises, you compare us, our national rankings in standardized test scores. We've actually climbed the charts since COVID. Now we've had some, some performance challenges, but what that tells me is while other states were doing things that caused even more challenges for their students, we lost less ground. And I think that that's a testament to our educators. I think that's a testament to our approach, our priorities, and our communities, frankly. So I think we've got a lot of good things going for us. So the mantra is sort of that I didn't really have coming into this, but I think it's sort of emerged is, we're on a good to great mission here.
Okay.
And that's been really, I think, exciting, to be a part of. We're join this team, lean in, let's work together, and everybody likes being, a part of something that's successful. And I think that we really have an opportunity to do that here, and just learning and experiencing more ways about how do we make that happen has been both a surprise and I think a joy of the work so far.
I love that. What are you most grateful for in the role?
Oh boy. I am most grateful. It sounds so cheesy, but the thing I loved most about working in the governor's office years ago was, and this is embarrassing to say, but I did not step foot in Medora until I was 24 years old.
Okay.
I grew up in the Red River Valley, came to Dickinson and Bismarck and other, Class A schools to play sports, but that was really it. And, all of the summer travel was usually revolved around sports and other things. So I didn't make it to Medora until I was 24, and it is my favorite place on earth. And so we are out there at least twice a year, usually once in the summer and then once not during peak tourist season. Mm-hmm. And, the thing that I love most is there's one gas station there. And when I worked in the governor's office, this idea of every single North Dakota license plate that you saw, and you have no idea, it's not like South Dakota. If you know someone's license plate in South Dakota, you know what county they live in, which I think is interesting. And as a data nerd, it was always fun with living there to be like, oh, why are you here from Sioux Falls, or why are you here from Rapid City? But you can't do that in North Dakota. And so I had no idea where people were from, whether they're up from Pembina County or down in Bowman County. But this idea that, I got to serve everybody, whether you're in our smallest communities or in our biggest communities. Yeah. I think people think because North Dakota is small, it's all the same. We have incredible diversity from, geographic diversity, from the Turtle Mountains to the Badlands to the Red River Valley to the cultural diversity of our Ukrainian ancestors out west to the traditional sort of Norwegians and Germans and indigenous history. I mean, there's just such a richness in North Dakota that you can't not work in the governor's office and fall in love with. And so to be able to be back and to be cheering everybody on has just been really fun. I guess, to put a bow on that, I walked into state track this past weekend, and I've been going to state track ever since I was a junior in high school. But this one was the first time, where I was excited to cheer for everybody, and it was my job to cheer for everybody.
Yes.
And that was really great. And to not only, I can't say I picked out a ton of kids, but to know like, hey, when I'm seeing, Hatton Northwood, like, okay, I know the building that those kids have walked through. I have a better sense of what they did to get here, what weight room they were using, what their experience was like. And that was just it was a thing that I was reflecting on, that I was really appreciative of. And I think the ability to cheer everybody on has been the most gratifying and exciting part of this. Some schools have given me some been very generous on giving me a T-shirt or a baseball cap. And my wife's a high school principal, so she has a very strict, like, only gear from my school in the house. But I've been breaking that often because it's been so fun to bring back a little piece of so many of these schools, with me. And I think it's been an important part of learning the job well, and, the part that I enjoy most.
That is super fun. I always say my favorite part is advocating for libraries at the local, state, regional, and national level. And you're really doing the same. I mean, you're advocating for all kids in North Dakota, as well as teachers and janitors and secretaries and, all of the related to our education system.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's a bigger part. Maybe that's a better answer. Thanks for answering it for me. But the department collects a lot of data, it distributes funds, it enforces the law. But really, at the end of the day, one of the primary roles of this job is to sort of serve as a bridge between the legislature and school districts. And sometimes that means you have to have a hard conversation with school leaders to say, hey, we can do better. And at other times that means you need to advocate to the legislature to say, hey, we can do better on teacher pay. We're one of the big takeaways, back to similarities. We have a workforce issue with teachers, and that's true in big school districts and true in small school districts. And I think we have an obligation to these kids to figure out how to solve that. And one of the ways that markets, adjust for workforce fluctuations is compensation. And that is not the only lever that we need to pull, but it's certainly one that we need to talk about. And so, figuring out how to do that in an honorable way that keeps kids at the center, and that we're all on the same page, that the legislature has trust and belief and pride in the product that our schools are, producing, the experience that students are having. And conversely, that the schools know that it's the legislature's job to ask tough questions and to push them, but ultimately to support them. So trying to bring everybody together, not only as one team of school districts, but really one team holistically of being that link between the 141 legislators that we have and, you know, our nearly 170 school districts, because it's going to take policy, it's going to take funding. Ultimately, it's going to take great teaching if we're going to be, you know, the best state in the nation.
That, Levi, I could talk to you for hours. Your passion is so inspiring. I'm going to wrap it up with the question I usually like to end the podcast with. And I know you're a nonfiction guy, so it's fine to give a nonfiction answer. But I never ask a librarian for their favorite book, and I've learned not to ask an educator for their favorite book either. But what's a book that you've read that you've enjoyed that you like people to know about?
Oh boy. I mean, I'm, you know, of the generation of Harry Potter having a profound impact on my love of reading. And so I'm reading the series to my little girls. You know, it's more of a exposure to words than really, you know, story, absorption, you know, at that age. But I think, you know, did sports and was probably more in the jock category in high school. But, you know, the Harry Potter series has had such a profound impact. And that's why I think it's just so important and why I'm so appreciative of the work that you and so many other, you know, librarians do to connect students and instill a love of reading. Because if we can get every kid in North Dakota to love reading, we've won half of the battle.
Absolutely.
Right. And the way that we get kids to love reading, again, just like experiences, for some it may be the arts, for others it may be track, for others it may be FFA or robotics, or Boy Scouts. It's going to look different. Similarly, it's going to look different in terms of what young people like to read. So that was sort of my formative moment that got me hooked on reading and frankly more excited about school. So I always like to give the, you know, Harry Potter series a shout out for, you know, the impact that it had on my long-term, not only just appreciation for literature, but just love of learning and appreciation. Even as a nonfiction guy, I got to, you know, you have pushed me in our conversations that fiction has a lot to teach us too.
It does.
But I'm a stand for any good, you know, with the opening of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library this summer, which I'm really excited for. I've been trying to read up on my, you know, Theodore Rex and just some Theodore Roosevelt, North Dakota, you know, history. And then, like I said, the Build the Life You Want, which is a collaboration between Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Arthur Brooks, which really dives into the art and science of happiness, is a book that I would recommend to anybody, not only for their own happiness journey, but as a parent or a grandparent or a mentor. It was just a really accessible way to think about happiness, and that it isn't this thing that just happens to us. And I think that's sort of the, you know, the romanticized, you know, it just comes and then it goes, as opposed to it's like working out, it's like exercise, it's a practice, it's like gratitude. It's if you're intentional about it and cultivate it, it's something that you know, can experience. And so I think that that's been both influencing how I've been approaching some of this work, you know, at DPI, as well as, you know, just being a neighbor and a citizen and a dad. And so I would encourage everybody to check that book out. Arthur Brooks and Oprah Winfrey. I believe it's Build the Life You Want, The Art and Science of Happiness.
Thank you, Levi, for taking time to speak with me today. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for joining us, listeners. And until next time, happy reading.